terribly systematic, I'm sorry for that. But, so I mean, what are the processes of recognition or non-recognition of legal entity status of religious groups in African countries? Do these processes derive from or emulate colonial or international models? How can we interpret current articulations in light of constitutionalism and the globalizing legal order? So the influence of global media as well and international human rights discourses, particularly lobbying groups on religious freedom. So this is an important new development that I will touch on later. What are the uses and abuses of the registration of religious groups in Africa? These are more ethnographic, historical questions. The legal scholars only tend to be more interested at the constitutional level. They're not interested in the actual cases. I mean, I'm interested in a comparative perspective, which may throw up whether there are similarities or differences in conception and practice. And as I'll mention at the end, we need more research that would allow us to compare Anglophone, Francophone, and Lusophone and Hispanophone context to be able to compare the processes and the uses and abuses. Significance, I mean, does this even matter? Well, I'm going to argue that it does. To what extent might it be mattering more? Ironically, in a sort of more neoliberal, democratizing context of it, how could the registration of religious groups become a tool of governance, good governance, or repression? What are the different uses and consequences of non-registering a group or banning it? Right? When would such a sort of ultimate act be deployed? What's the fate of unregistered groups? That's important. Can you survive as an unregistered group? Or are you going to be harassed? Or what are you going to be denied? And also kind of a broader question here, what do these, what does the research show in terms of how the strategies might be leading to the development of what could be called a normative religiosity, right? This is good religion, this is bad religion. And what does it also tell us about changing entanglements of the religious and the secular? And also, this is another broader point. What are the links between restrictions on the registration of religious groups to social hostilities, religiously related conflict, limited political participation, broader restrictions on freedom of religion and belief? So this is where the Pew 2014 report would provide the frame for those types. National Religious Freedom Act. I mean, even though that's pretty low down the pecking order in terms of priorities and even, we'll say, within the realm of human rights and in terms of resources, but there is an ambassador and there's an annual report, and all foreign service officers are trained to in this area. I mean, that they need to know about religious freedom. I'm not quite sure about the nature of that training, but at least it's on the docket. So, and then we could say that the concerns about persecution of Christians with lobbying groups, generally evangelical, predominantly American. I mean, there's a whole sector there that is very empowered financially, politically, and influences, whether it's the US Commission on International Religious Freedom or particular politicians or the UN. Some of them also operate at the UN level in terms of trying to influence policy at that level. So, I mean, yes, they are very articulate on freedom of religion and belief, but they don't usually say belief, they just say freedom of religion. And that's significant right there. So they actually say religious freedom. It is articulated by them as the primary, as the number one right that sort of gives rise to all other rights, right? Because all human rights come from God. So I mean, they can be very articulate in claiming the importance of this. But as you may appreciate, the U.S. government, as with many other governments, perhaps not so much the case in Africa, but certainly in Europe, they don't want to touch religion, right? They don't want to. They'd rather operate. Even if you're a Tony Blair, you know, he only very late in his term of office kind of wore his religious heart on his sleeve, but he's made up for it after leaving office in terms of promoting sort of international initiatives regarding religion and peace and democracy and development and all of that. So I would say that the international scene has become a lot more active relating to religious freedom issues. In terms of missionaries, I mean, whether a country will give a visa to a missionary, now that's another matter. That's actually almost like a separate area of investigation. I mean, I was in Nigeria when the government, and I can't remember what year this was, I think it was probably the early 80s, the government decided that it was going to have a less liberal attitude to allowing missionaries in, you know, left, right, and center, and stated that they would only allow a missionary in if he or she or the organization could prove that they were going to do something practical and relevant for the development, for national development. They couldn't just come in and preach and spread their, you know, disseminate their own religion. So, I mean, that's fair enough. But the politics of permits for missionaries could explain a lot. Now, of course, a lot of them come in illegally. On the West African coast, a lot of the Pentecostal missionaries are crossing borders. I mean, I know this from my colleague Matthews Ojo. They find ways. They just move on quickly. And guess what? They're also using the media so that they can set up a media event, a mass-mediated crusade. And by the time somebody's worked out that they haven't got a permit, they're already in the next country. So you see, with the advent of modern media, greater kind of mobility, I would say that missionaries have become much more sophisticated in flying under the radar.
But I don't think there's any right. There's no right for foreign nationals to be able to spread religion.
Right.
In any of the documents.
Right. Do we have another question?